The Physics Center had been going on for
20 years.
20 years, just about.
21.
21, yeah. And over the years, we'd had lots of conversations about maybe having a sabbatical program here or having winter conferences or whatever. And there were always some people who said, no, that detracts from our mission. You're not supposed to go out and have fun and so on in the winter. But a bunch of us were really interested in trying to do something, and the idea is it's a different kind of meeting than the summer meetings because it's a conference, and it's a finite length of time, 1 week, and you really talk about crucial new developments. And you bring in a group of people who weren't coming in the summer, a lot of whom later started coming, and it developed. So there's been all this discussion and nothing had happened, and then I think Marty started pushing rather hard on this.
Well, as a skier, I wanted to come here during the winter and have a physics and ski conference. There had been models of this earlier in Morillon, in Europe, and there had been nothing like it in the United States, to the best of my knowledge. There had been summer conferences and this, that, and the other thing, but there had never been a winter conference. But everybody said, no, you can't do it for various reasons. One of the reasons they said is Aspen's too expensive, it'll be impossible to do.
It will look like a boondoggle.
It will look like a boondoggle, sound like a boondoggle, and if it looks and sounds like it, it must be.
Yeah.
And as we discovered, once the things got started, another part of it was that a lot of physicists don't ski.
Yeah. Well,
We discovered that when some of them tried.
I didn't know any of this, so when Marty came and proposed this winter conference, I thought it was a good idea. And
As president.
I was present at the time, so I went to the trustees. I don't know whether that corresponds to what nowadays is members or trustees.
Members, yes.
Members.
Yeah, who's members?
Anyway, it was called trustees. And proposed it, and
There was still
It- it was-
opposition, but it went.
there was opposition, but it
There were
went.
those of us who wanted it.
That
and there
doesn't
were some
mean
who
that
didn't.
I didn't get a few letters afterwards.
But I think it took a while
Like-
because in the notes I found, it was first discussed, I think, at an informal trustees meeting in the summer of '83. And I don't know what happened in the ensuing year. Probably Marty had to push a bit harder, and you had to
Yes.
push a bit harder. And you finally appointed an organizing committee in the summer of '84.
That's right, but by that time I considered it a done deal. I mean, I don't know about informal meeting and formal meeting. The trustees said yes.
Trustees said yes as an experiment. It was,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
that's right.
Yes, it was
So-
an experiment.
All
So
right.
obviously you have to perform the experiment. So
Well, the
we got an
experiment was,
organizing committee.
I'm sorry, Peter. The experiment was very different, though, because today the center runs the meeting. The center finances it. The center is behind the meeting. The center is fiscally responsible for everything that goes on. First two meetings, this was not the case at all. The center gave us the place. The center did not give us any money. The proposals that we made to the various organizations, I'd like to discuss them in a little more detail later, but the proposals were made by the organizing group, literally, and they were made in the center's name, but without the center having the funds. The funds came to the organizing committee, and we actually brought in help to run the first couple of meetings because the center wasn't prepared at that time to take care of it in the winter. And it was a very different thing, and it was very experimental, as you point out.
yes.
And I think that was a part of the discomfort that some of the trustees felt with this experiment because there had been no history
Yeah.
of the Physics Center really allowing something like this to happen under its aegis without having full control. And this was partly run by the Physics Center because it was here in our building, and it was partly run from this other institution, which we were friendly, but, you know, some of the trustees, some trustees are more conservative than others, shall we
Yes,
say.
yes, we know.
Well, let's point out, we didn't do this voluntarily. We were forced into this mode of operation in
Well,
order to have the winter
well,
meetings.
that's right.
Yeah,
That's
part,
right.
part of it was that the center's budget was still very limited
That's
at that
right.
point, and there was a feeling that this is going to cost the center money because we had to pay staff, and we're increasing the amount of time that staff had to be around.
Yes.
And the staff weren't enthusiastic about being around extra time, so it was all sort of shaky.
Yes.
In any case, it was an experiment, and that's what an experiment is. You try something out.
Right.
Well, anyway,
So I don't
19
know why people were so upset. I got one letter, which you saw from Pierre Ramon, who said, that's now 84, and he says, how can you do such a thing without consulting the trustees? So that may be my fault too,
And I
the
think the
question of
answer was that
communication.
I think the answer was that it wasn't an official, regular trustees meeting. We just do stuff informally around here. We
did
sat around and talked about
consult
it.
the trustees.
Yes, exactly.
But then Peter did appoint the committee, and we did start working on things. Summer of 1984, there was a big high-energy physics working conference out at Snowmass, which was concerned with design of the superconducting supercollider. Very good physics going on, and so there were physicists from all over the world there in particle physics, and the first winter conference was going to be on particle physics. So we had contact with people there, and I remember Marty and I went out and had lunch with a bunch of physicists there to talk about what would be a good program to have, which depended partly on what experimental results were going to be current, and what theoretical ideas, and got a start on it then. And then the committee did meet again later.
Yes.
Why don't you say who was on the committee?
I would like to read off the names of the committee members
Yeah.
as well as our international
Before you
advisory.
do that, I want to say, when that was appointed, I sat back and wanted to just say, "Bless you, my children." Didn't quite turn out that way always.
You couldn't sit back.
Well, the local organizing committee was Randy, Durand, Syd Meshkov, Dave Pines, Mal Ruderman, Dave Schramm, Mike Simmons, and Fred Zachariasen.
You was the chair.
I was the chair of the committee, and I would also at the same time read off our scientific advisory committee, which I had forgotten all about. It's actually turned out to be a rather illustrious committee. Joe Ballum, Cassidy from Utah, Dave Klein, Jim Cronin, Pierre Darula, Murph Goldberger, Chris Quigg, Herwig Schupper, Roy Schwitters, Frank Scully, and Paul Serding. And as an international committee, this had some class associated with it. Not all of them showed up, but a considerable number did.
So anyway, I think it's true that Peter appointed an organizing committee, and it was certainly important, especially from the point of view of the Physics Center, that there be this organizing committee of people associated with the center. But when I looked back, as I did recently, through the file, the thing that struck me was how much work had already been done by the time the organizing committee met to do a little bit, because Marty, and how much work was done by the blocks independent of the organizing committee. Everything from arranging ski tickets with Highlands to
Sweaters.
getting the sweaters, to arranging the poster, to talking to the International Organizing Committee. There was just,
Training the horse carts.
it's an immense amount of work to do something the very first time. And committees are not good at doing work. They're good at looking over the shoulder of someone, but it really is Marty who pulled all of this stuff together to make it happen. It wasn't just pushing on the Physics Center to say, let me make it happen. Somebody then had to do it.
Well, if you're saying Marty, you've got to put B into the equation because she did about as much as I did or even more.
Yes, exactly.
And the other people that really contributed were Randy and Bernice. And I remember very fondly the last day of, or before the meeting, or the evening the meeting was going to start, and we had to stuff briefcases with everything because the cooperation at the center was not of the highest. Namely, we had to do it, and we did it with joy and pleasure and had a hell of a good time doing that.
Maybe it's best not on film, but the stuffing briefcases is not the only thing that we did.
There was some other stuff that the three of us did.
I don't remember the day before the meeting fondly. First of all, I came back. It's not a time I'm usually in Aspen, so I came back just for the meeting a couple of days before. And the first thing is I walk in here, the phone rings. It's the electric company. They're going to turn off all electricity.
I don't remember that.
You don't remember that? Well, it may not have made that much of an impression on you.
Remember, you were the president.
I wanted to just go back to the airport and fly home. But,
You paid the bill.
well, it turned out it was paid, but they acted as if it hadn't been paid, and the Montessori children were
Going to be in the
were in
dark.
front of the physics building. That was
At that time,
At
and
that
for years
time.
previous, we had been renting Stranahan Hall to Terry Inn's Montessori school. And, I mean, it was a nice thing to do, but it sort of changed things when you walked in and everything was at knee level rather than at eye level.
yes, but it was very nice walking in and they say, "Good morning, Dr. Kaus."
Well, when I can't remember whether it was Maggie and Nick or Maggie and B were being interviewed, Maggie commented on how cold it was when they met before the winter conference, and they met over here at the Physics Center. So it was not just the electricity, the whole place seemed sort of shut down.
Well, the
Yes.
school would probably have not been in session then. It was more or less holiday
Yes.
season. And
That's
so
right.
they would have turned the heat off probably.
Yeah.
Maybe, can we discuss the winter conference itself a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, we were housed at the old Aspen Meadows, which in that time was kind of like a cheap 60s motel. I mean, it was dreadful. I shared a room with Steigman. That was the year he fell off the ski lift at Highlands.
Oh, yes.
And so I was just taking ski lessons at Highlands, and I walk out, and Dave Schramm says, Sid, you hear what happened to Gary? And so it was my job to keep him up. After you guys took him to the hospital, you and B took him to the hospital, it was my job to keep him up and not let him go to sleep because they were afraid he had a concussion or something. So that was one of the sidelights of that conference. And we stayed at the Meadows for what, that year, maybe another year, and then they kicked us out because they were going to remodel, and we went to the Grand Aspen in downtown, which again was kind of a schlop house, but
That was not an improvement.
it was not an improvement. But you could ski directly into the lobby. I mean, so that was a good thing.
And
Anyhow.
right, you could ski to the gondola.
You could ski to the gondola, yeah. So those are some of the physical arrangements at this. For me, it was great because I had only been on skis a couple times, as Simmons and Pinsky can testify. And so at this conference, I took 12 days of ski lessons in a row, and Marty insisted that I go into the ski race. I mean, that was the most ridiculous thing known to man. I was cursing him upside down and sideways internally for doing that.
But you got a prize.
Yeah, the booby prize is what I got.
But you know, the conference itself really was a big scientific success.
Yes, it
And
was.
it kind of reminds me of Aspen itself. I came here in the early days, and you could put in a full day's work at the Physics Center and still do some fishing or play some tennis and feel more productive because of the lack of distractions. And even though we were skiing in the middle of the day and conferring in the morning and the evening, it really was a full day of conference, and it was very, very good.
Not to mention discussions on the lifts, et cetera, et
That's
cetera.
right. That's
I
right.
would like to point out one thing that we did do, and that was we published, and if you want to take a look at this, we published the proceedings of the first conference. And we were very careful to do that because of all the criticisms that had been heaped on us in advance of the meeting, before the meeting ever existed, that this was going to be a Playboy's pleasure. And we really insisted that everybody turn in their papers and that they be published. And we had great cooperation from the New York Academy of Sciences, which published the first 2 volumes of the winter meeting. And they did this at no cost to us because we had an incredibly limited budget.
Right.
I'd like to point out that our budget was bare bones for what we attempted to do. And one of the great helps were Maggie and Nick DeWolf, who had one of the evening meals at their house, which lowered our budget considerably and enabled us to do other things. The cooperation from the town was marvelous. We were able to get discounts on meals at the Highlands, ski lessons, ski tickets. Everybody cooperated.
No, I just wanted to add that because at that time, January was low part of the high season. And so Marty was able to negotiate good rates for us to have our housing.
I had to demonstrate to Washington that I could run the conference more cheaply in Aspen than in Evanston.
Yeah.
That was a key issue. So I made up a budget for Evanston and I made up a budget for Aspen. And the Aspen budget won. At that point, people at the DOE started talking seriously to me because they were terribly worried about having this kind of meeting and how it would look. And this plagued us for the first couple of years, this kind of work ethic involved. It was marvelous, though, that we succeeded both on the national and international level of establishing this set of meetings as one of the premier conference series in the world now. And I'm very pleased that we really did have fun doing this.
We worked very hard getting good people for the first years, and then people started coming on their own because it was the thing to do. We worked very hard on it. We met in Evanston and got the final program in order. And
It is, if somebody wants to get the full skiing in and hear all the lectures, I found it somewhat strenuous.
It was tiring.
It was tiring.
That's right. But you could do it.
We had a full
I mean,
program.
8 to 10 lectures,
Try 8 to 11.
ski, what?
8 to 11.
8 to
yeah,
11,
Yeah.
skiing
Till 4.
till 4,
Conference starting at 5 o'clock.
5
4:30.
to
4:30.
8
Till
usually.
8, yeah.
Yeah. So,
And we had 3 Nobel laureates attending the first meeting, 2 of which gave public lectures, Jim Cronin and Murray Gell-Mann. And this was a highly attended group. The group wasn't highly attended, the meeting was.
And there's a big sheaf of letters in the file from people like Cronin after the meeting, as I recall, congratulating you on a really good meeting.
Yes,
It really did work.
we really had fantastic positive feedback. And I want to take this opportunity on camera to thank everyone because the people in this room arranged for this year for me to get this belt buckle. I don't know whether you can see it, but this is a
Keep it
highly
up.
prized article
Zoom
of
in.
Martin Block. I don't know whether you can zoom in on it. It's gorgeous, and it was presented to me at the particle physics meeting on our 20th anniversary. In our dreams, I don't think any of us were talking 20th anniversary with the winter meeting.
I thought it was gonna be tough to keep it going because the opposition did not die down despite the success.
Oh, yeah, but then,
Uh-huh.
I think since the condensed guys wanted in, the Astros wanted in, that was already a measure of success.
Yes.
So the Astros were in.
But
The
we didn't
Astros-
have a separate Astro
No, we didn't
week.
have a separate one,
We had
but it
two
was
particle
LSU
weeks.
bugging me the third year to get in with condensed matter. And that was a sea change in what was going on. And then,
First 2 years were straight particle physics.
no, they were particle and astro meetings.
Mostly, yeah.
Well, Gary spent 2 weeks, he came to both meetings.
Stagman almost died because there was Astro.
I know what the worry was. The worry was that first 2 years, you really pay attention to what you do. And then when it becomes routine,
Yes.
It's soft.
it'll slop off. So that one has lectures because you have to fill the time, but maybe there's nothing interesting to say, but you have it anyway.
I don't think that was the case with this series. As a matter of fact, Syd Meshkov saw to it that it wasn't. Very much so. In several ways. He really organized the thing on a great level for all these years afterward. You've stopped doing this now.
Yes. Now Joe Licken is doing it.
The youngsters are inheriting the world.
Joe will do okay. He's a good guy.
And
you know,
on a personal note, if I might add, very, very personal one, my son Stephen has been running every other year one of the biophysics meetings. So it's a baton that's been passed on.
I know there was one year when I was named to be chairman. I think Turner was president. Basically, by that time, we had 3 one-week conferences going. And I remember, especially for the particle week, we stopped doing proceedings, and it was before the era of the web. And I used to get copies of the Xerox copies of everybody's transparencies, and then we would publish a big, thick volume. And I got them to do it at the Caltech office. And then when I was at the SSC, we did it there. So that helped some. Then when I started working on gravity, there was a mutual agreement that we have a 4th week of gravitational wave physics. Then the bios decided they wanted a week, and so now we've kind of routinely had of the order of 5 weeks. Now, in the gravity week, sometimes we alternate between Europe and the US, and we go to Elba, which is not bad. Actually, the best conference food I've ever had any place. Running
There, Marty.
it's just the way it is. Organizing the conferences overall is not too hard, except for the alternate week of the bios. When Steve does it, I don't have to worry. Otherwise, we had a harder time. I think now under a new regime with Andre as president, who's a bio himself, that I think that's going to get taken care of, and we'll have a decent succession of bio meetings. But it takes some. It used to take negotiating with the ski court to get good rates, and takes continual dealings with the meadows. Vis-a-vis housing, that Jane does mainly. I didn't have to do much in the latter years. It was down to the system. But the trick is to get good people to organize the individual weeks. And so you kind of have to know who's good, who's trustworthy, who's going to work and not goof off.
You have to negotiate how many glasses of wine
Yeah, well,
they will serve for dinner.
Yeah, I got to be pretty good at that.
Well, I wanted to add something about this business of making sure the conference is fresh and continues to get good people. One of the changes that we made, I think for the first year to make it happen, you had to essentially call up people and invite them.
Yeah.
But that's very far from the tradition of the Physics Center and what's made it what it is. So very quickly after that, we moved to a system of open application plus selected invitations to make sure we got good people, but also to make sure that it was open.
Yeah.
And I think we went through many years, and maybe still are doing that, of accepting proposals for organizers for weeks. Sometimes you have to find somebody, sometimes somebody comes in.
I would
But
say
this business of continually refreshing who organizes it and how the organization is done is an important aspect of what makes the Physics Center work during the summer, and it was important for the winter.
Yes, we're very definitely now soliciting outside proposals. People make proposals, and then they're evaluated and choices made, and then the organizing committee has to basically make sure that the actual organizers do their work. And one of the things which they have to do is get in proposals to funding agencies. A big change from the beginning is that the funding agencies now know that this is going on, they're going to get proposals, and they take it seriously. So you usually get your funding. And
But there's been a big change, I forgot, apropos your comments, there's been a big change in how the funding for some of it goes. Because we used to have to write a proposal to the funding agencies for each week. And some years ago, it became part of the actual overall physics center budget to allocate a certain amount of money towards some of the workshops. Others of the workshops still had to apply for outside money, but that cut down the work a lot because
When you say workshop, did you mean the winter
the
meeting?
winter meetings, the winter conferences, yeah,
Okay.
sorry, winter conferences. The amount of time and effort that you expended to get $3,500 or $5,000 was kind of ridiculous. I mean, if you counted the time of the physicists, the secretarial staff, dealing with NSF or submitting the proposals, it was a point when it became kind of silly, and I think at that point it was recognized that most of it should be out of the Physics Center budget, so you don't have to spend your time doing that.
If I'm not mistaken, the winter conference series brings in quite a bit
Oh,
of
it
money
does.
for the Center for Physics,
It does.
so that the center has embraced it wholeheartedly, and so has the community.
Right.
Now, the public lectures have helped the community embrace us. I mean, that's been an important aspect.
The question has come up, how did the New York Academy of Sciences get involved in the publication of the proceedings? At a meeting, we all talked about where we could get published, and if I'm not mistaken, Heinz was not at the Academy at that time, but
According to the
But
book,
according to
yes.
the book, he was the executive director.
he was then?
Yes.
Then it was Heinz, I apologize for my lack of memory. I thought he went there after the,
That's
Conceivably
possible.
went
That's
after the conference.
it was after, he was still, to my knowledge, not at the Academy when this was negotiated.
I dealt with somebody else the second
Yeah.
year.
If I'm not in error, it might have been Heinz who suggested that we could go to the Academy, and I called the Academy and spoke to their scientific director, and memory fails me completely at this
But
point.
I seem to remember that Heinz suggesting it, yes.
I think that was the order of business, but the Academy embraced it wholeheartedly and was incredibly cooperative. The only drawback to the Academy, as I mentioned earlier, was the fact that it took them almost a year to actually publish the book, which made the timeliness of these papers a little bit out of date. On the other hand, as you see from the volume, they did a gorgeous job.
Yeah.
And this was done, as I say, at no cost to us whatsoever, which is not true of most of these publication. Oh, in addition, they sent a copy to every participant, and as well as to whatever libraries requested it.
The organizing committee was Marty as chair, Randy, Syd Meshkov, David Pines, Mal Ruderman, Dave Schramm, Fred Zacharias, and me. And I believe the reason for that appointment is that the trustees explicitly said, we want this to be under the control of the Physics Center if our name is going to be associated with it. So there's Marty, whose idea it was and who did all the work, and then there's a bunch of guys who were trustees who thought it was a great idea and wanted to see it succeed. And I think that's why the organizing committee was what it was. And in our memory, at least, the two people who didn't make it to the main organizing session in Evanston in October were Mal and Fred. And I didn't look to see who came. We certainly had a major post-mortem because we did minutes of the meeting and passed them around in order to justify continuing the thing the next year. We talked about what the problems were and what the successes were and how to go forward. And I don't remember who from the organizing committee came to that February meeting, but it's in the record somewhere if anyone wants to go down and look for it.
If you want to look for 20 boxes, yeah.
Let me say something about that first meeting. There were a couple of things that stand out. One was that I remember, just as you pointed out to DOE, that you could hold it cheaper in Evanston. I think I inserted into our proposal that I could hold a meeting cheaper in Aspen than in Washington, D.C.
For sure. I wonder why you didn't choose Washington.
Yeah, I put in Washington. And then we had each of us writing parts of the proposal. And what impressed me was that Dave Schramm was writing the astro part. And he just sat down and like a bulldozer created an entire proposal right there.
In 10 minutes.
In 10 minutes. It was very impressive to see that.
No, but the first meeting was really interesting because, in a sense, we had no idea what we were doing. And we had nothing to fall back on. We had no history. And so the questions came up, how do we do this? And what decisions do we make as a committee? And what decisions do we leave to the field at large? And we had to come up with both a proposal to the various organizations, and we were not very skilled at that particularly, as well as a proposal to the people in Aspen to make it work on this end, and a scientific program on the spot. And all of this was achieved in, I don't know what, 2 days?
A couple of days, I think.
I think it was 2 days
Couple of days.
of meeting. As a matter of fact, we took an afternoon off to hear Syd, who gave a
That's right, I'd
colloquium.
forgotten about that.
It was really a very, very interesting 2 days.
Yeah.
It was chock full of very, very good ideas. If you look at the table of contents of that book, it's very impressive, even today, to look back that 21 years ago, this was the kind of physics that we were able to do in Aspen for the first time.
There was an article in there, one article on neutrino masses and one article on neutrinos double beta decay. I mean, so that's topics that we're interested in today.
It started out as a conference and is today a series of conferences,
Right.
as opposed to workshops, as opposed to people just getting together and talking about physics. The latter two were the purview of the summer program, and then and as today, they are what goes on in the summer. In the summer, we don't have weekly conferences. The idea was to have an intensive meeting for 1 week, formal presentations. Nothing in the science was informal. All the rest, the social programs, were the informality. We wanted an informal setting for a formal program. And the first decision that we made was that we were not going to have a separate astro and separate particle physics, but the two fields were sufficiently intertwined that we would have two separate conferences, each conference having astro and particle physics intermingled. And that was the first decision we took. Now, later on, we changed that. As Syd pointed out earlier, we went to a week of particle physics, a week of astrophysics, and then condensed matter, and so forth. But it evolved from this initial decision to have conferences. The formats are more or less the same today as they were 21 years ago.
I'd point out a little bit more of the difference between summer and winter. Summer program, we have workshops, supposedly, but they're very different because a workshop is something designed to attract a group of people who have common interests, and it goes on typically 3 or 4 weeks, and you have people with common interests here talking to each other. But our policies at the Physics Center are very much that you keep the number of seminars, formal talks down, keep them down to 2 days a week, and even then, it's 2 half-days a week. So people have lots of time to talk to each other and do their own work. It's very informal. While the winter conferences are, as Marty emphasized, real conferences, there is a schedule.
Right.
Talks every half hour, continuously, and you're really concentrating on getting lots of new results, things you might not have heard about. And then the informal part is you go out skiing and you're sitting in the ski lift. Well, that was a very interesting talk. Well, yeah, what do you think about that? And it develops. You make the contacts and continue things that way. But the focus is very different. It's the formal presentations rather than informal discussion.
Right.
Well, to some extent, we copied the Morion style, which was just as Randy described.
French
That's even
conference.
more so. I mean, that's 10-minute talks and so on. We try to avoid that. I mean, usually most of the workshops don't have 10-minute talks. They're more
Conferences.
They're conferences, yeah. Well, no, the reason I use it is in the gravity one, for internal purposes, it's called a workshop. We try to have roughly kind of equal mixtures of theorists and experimentalists. If you go down, just go through one of the programs for each of the conferences, certainly in the particle one, it's about 50-50. Sometimes it varies, but the aim is to have a mixture. And these are very interactive conferences, even though they're scheduled. There's also scheduled discussion time after each talk, so that people can really get into it. So it's a very different emphasis than in the summer.
And in the summer, for our experience has been, we love to have experimentalists come here. And despite what Marty said on another interview about designing a bubble chamber or something here, most experimentalists find that they can't afford to be away from wherever they're working for the 3 or 4 or more weeks that we encourage participants to spend in the center during the summer program. Experimentalists are accustomed to going away to get the latest results and talk about the latest results and being away for a week. But to go away for a month at prime time when there's no teaching is difficult. So typically we will have maybe half and half at a winter program, and we're lucky if we have, what do you think, 10% experimentalist or less coming through the summer program? So it's a very, very different kettle of fish.
I'd like to add a comment, though, to the organization. The people that attend the conferences are invited, I misspoke, apply, and we have an open audience, but we don't have an open speakers. It is the organizers of the conference that set the agenda and invite the speakers. So the speakers are invited, the audience is free-formed. Anybody who wishes to come that we have room for would basically be able to be here. This is not a case where people apply basically to, like some meetings that we've had where you give a 10-minute paper and you ask
Right.
to be able to talk.
But there is a parallel with the way the summer program now operates, because typically the members will approve of a summer workshop, which will have a small number of organizers who choose of the order of a dozen truly key people to be there and to lead the workshop. And anyone else who comes is going to come through the normal application procedure, so it's very open, based upon the admissions committee's judgment of who will make the biggest contribution. So
Yes.
it's not so different from the winter program.
I was going to say that as the winter conference has accommodated somewhat to the physics center, the physics center has moved a little bit towards the winter
A little
conference. For instance, we have discussions about a program. We never used to have a program for the summer.
I remember for decades people saying to me, "What's happening at the physics center
Right.
this summer?" To which I would always reply, "The same thing that always happens. Physics. People come and they do physics."
Yeah, but I remember in the early days in the summer, there, even though there wasn't that formal schedule, the emphasis is when is Murray going to be there?
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, that was,
Oh, that's,
Yeah, that's a different issue. Well, one question which some people might have is why, when this winter conference is such a good thing, don't we do it for 3 or 4 months?
can't.
And the answer is we can't, because we started out in what's called low season in Aspen, which not exactly low, but it's ski season.
January.
Month of January, second week of January, families have been here skiing over Christmas, kids are back in school, they go back, and it's what some people think of as cold. Those of us from Wisconsin think it's rather warm. But we come here at a time when it's not high tourist season. Then you get on about last week of January and into February, and then the ski business picks up and housing gets more expensive, more difficult to get, and eventually we're just priced out of the market.
Right.
But for some reason, which I don't understand to this day, that phenomenon that you described kind of stopped, and they began to offer us times in February. I remember being flabbergasted by it, and we quick grabbed them. And we've had conferences as late as the third week in February at the January type rates. How long?
We're guaranteed business. That's
Oh, yeah. We're guaranteed business. Absolutely. The guy with the cards that stuck to the.
Yes.
Okay,
So B wanted us to get back to some of the fun parts, and
Good.
there was lots of fun in skiing and lots of fun at the banquets. And in a different interview, she talked a little bit about the reception we held one evening at the Historical Society's facility. I've always sort of been fascinated by watching sleight of hand. And for years, there was a young man around here who showed up in the bars dressed in black tie, doing sleight of hand stuff. So when we were organizing that thing, I found him, I tracked him down and asked if he would be interested in doing it. Now, I'd seen him in a bar, but he showed up at the Historical Society, wandering around in a crowd of physicists and their wives, pulling off sleight of hand. And I remember there were 6 or 8 of us standing around him, and he looked at Helene Slansky and he said, "I don't believe we've met." And she was sort of taken aback, and she shook his hand and told him her name, and he engaged in some banter. And then he turned back and said, "By the way, do you have the time?" And she looked at her wrist, and her watch was gone. With 6 or 8 people standing around, he reached in, opened his coat, and said, "Take my wallet out," and unzipped my wallet and look inside, and lo and behold, there was her watch. And the whole evening went like that, with this kid wandering around, amazing all these physicists. But that was only one of the fun aspects, and I think you guys organized ski races that
We
were a
did.
great hit.
because we felt that one afternoon during this whole week of meetings, there should be an afternoon off for everybody, not going back at 4 o'clock for the sessions, and just having ski races, competitive. Everyone had to participate. No one was permitted to not participate. We had a cheering squad. The kids of some of the conferees that were attending made, what would you call it?
Pom-poms.
Pom-poms to cheer on their favorite racer. And the racing was timed by the timing devices on the
NASCAR
ski
people.
slope, which
NASCAR
was
course.
the NASCAR course. And we had anticipated an awards dinner. So before we came to Aspen, we had trophies made. So there was first place, there was second place, there was third place, there was last place, there was who had the most falls place, and when there was the injured award. And unfortunately I think it was the first winter meeting, that there were 3 knee injuries. We only had 1 medal. So then I think it was Martin that decided that we needed to see the hospital bills. And the one that had the highest hospital bill was awarded the Medal of the Wounded Knee. And so on. And it was just hilarity in between serious physics.
Well, the Europeans that were there that rode shotgun on the stagecoach that we hired to come from the meadows to the historical society, screaming cowboy notes on the top of their lungs. It was quite a sight. Now, we had a great time. Everybody enjoyed it.
Yeah.
In addition to
Even
the science.
Steigman, when he fell out of the lift.
Was it the first year that Steigman?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
that was
Steigman is riding up on one
serious-
of those
serious
old
fall.
chairlifts
On the
At
Highlands.
Highlands.
on the Highlands, and he's in the left seat,
Left,
and there's a
yeah.
guy in the right
He's
seat.
a roller.
The guy in the right seat said he looked away, he looked back, and Gary was gone.
He was down. We saw him
He had been
fall.
pulled under the
It
bar.
was easy. The chairs
Swayed.
swayed some, and it was easy if you had your skis slightly sideways to get them caught
Caught it on a pole and
on a pole and
it's
be
pulled out.
pulled out.
And it was not a short fall. He
No, it's
fell a
about-
long way.
He fell
20
about
feet.
20 feet, but fortunately there was a lot of snow, so it was a soft landing, and my son Stephen and I were riding up on the lift together, and Steve is a very, very good skier, and we got up to the top. We told the ski patrol, and Steve skied down to Gary, and it was amazing that Gary, through this entire fall, essentially did very, very little harm,
Busted
minimal
something
harm.
here.
In his hand, he had a small bone that was fractured, and
I think he broke his glasses.
I don't
or
recall
something like
that. But
Face down.
We were worried
he
about
was-
a concussion.
we were much more worried about a
Yeah.
concussion. Sid was sent to the hospital to keep him company all night.
No.
No.
That's not right.
no.
He came back
the
to
hotel. I'm
back to
sorry.
the room.
I-
It was
I-
my
We
room.
spent the day holding his hand. We had a friend in town that was a neurologist, and we called him, and he examined Gary over
He
hours.
was retired. Came out to do this.
It was very frightening.
Yes.
Oh,
but
yes.
The effect on Gary was absolutely minimal. He came back a day later to the meeting and stayed the second week. He is the only one I knew of the meetings that spent 2 weeks, the first week and the second week.
No, I think I was there too.
Oh, that wasn't on the committee.
Oh, well, yeah.
The only participant.
You know, I remember Schramm at the ski race. Dave did not like to come in second, and so
Dave was not an elegant skier.
he was not an elegant skier,
Powers,
but we
strong.
ran into a ski shop out there. Dave was getting his skis waxed, racing like he was going to be fast. Well, I was very proud of myself because getting to the last gate, I was 2 seconds ahead of him. then I hooked a ski and the gate crashed and got up and still was just about that much behind.
Well, I would have thought Steve Block would have won.
Oh, well, he was a
Steve was
professional.
out of
Blocks
class.
were
No.
professionals.
He
They were
was
not
not allowed
allowed.
to compete.
Or the concours.
Yeah.
He was
Exactly.
giving some pointers to the racers. as I
Actually, he
recall.
conducted
right.
racing clinics.
That's right.
He was
Yeah.
getting
He did.
pointers.
He was.
For the first 2 years, Steve came out and did
Yeah.
racing clinics.
That's right.
He
That's
was a
right.
grad student then, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you and I, in fact, went down the hill with Steve just before the race.
But there were a
Got
few
pointers.
people, or quite a few people at the conference who didn't ski, and they were given a dispensation, but they did walk up and cheer.
Remember Koshiba walked
Koshiba came up, yes.
up. He marched up the mountain.
Walked up.
But I think the composition of the conference attendees has changed a lot, because now there are a lot of people who actually want to go to Buttermilk and take the elementary classes. It was less so in the beginning. I mean, I was a novice, so that's when I really started skiing. But you had a whole raft of your cronies who were hotshot European skiers, and they would go thundering down the mountain. There's some, but I think it's less now. It's less.
Well, there were a lot of CERN people.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
CERN people are good skiers on
By
there.
definition. Yeah.
Well, just losing Slansky means
Yeah.
a great decrease in the average capability.
By about a factor of 10.
Right.
He was the most elegant skier.
He's a gorgeous skier. I think that the winter meetings are suffering now from being too formal, in the sense that there isn't enough time for ski races. Aspen is a place where it could be a lot more fun.
You can both get physics done and have fun.
Yes. I think we showed that the first few years.
Yes.
I suspect that the two of you and Steve are what make things like ski races happen. If you're organizing it from afar, it's much less likely to happen.
You're right.
What I understand is that the way the winter conferences are going to be constructed in the future is, in principle, somewhat different than in the past. That's what I'm told. That it's the idea is to have the selection of the topics be voted on by the members as a whole, as we did in the program committee. And this year, I don't think, I mean, Joe Licken's now in charge of it. I'm not. I'm on the committee, but I'm not in charge. And I think this year, so far, Joe's basically been functioning, it looks like, in the old mode. But the idea is that in the future, it'll be like that. So that's going to be a little different in the way it's set up.
The committee is appointed much earlier and to plan for essentially a year and a half later. But the idea is the committee is supposed to, in the spring, get the topics together and get them approved at the July meeting, and then you have time for fundraising, et cetera.